Good morning and welcome to this, the 13th meeting of 2013 of the European and External Relations Committee. Could I make the usual request that all mobile phones are switched off? The first item on our agenda this morning is the Brussels Bulletin. Members will have a copy of it in their pack. If there's any questions or comments from members. Helen?
Just to sort of first of all compliment the officials who prepared this, because it's a very full and very detailed report, and it was of particular note that there's still issues around about the budget, and it looks like the budget's not going to be concluded at this time of year, and it could be that we're looking into July, August, September, maybe even beyond that, which is slightly worrying for everyone. But you know, having moved on from that, I mean, I think one of the other things that we're very pleased to note is about the negotiations that are going to go on about the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, because that, it would seem, according to these papers, has got the potential, if they can get through these negotiations, of creating up to 2 million jobs, which is really, you know, something that we all desperately need. And you know, given that, you know, there's such a huge problem about unemployment figures across Europe. And that's something that, you know, we're all very concerned about. One of the things I was also reading, I can't remember if it's in this paper or in the newspapers, but they were saying that one of the other initiatives that they're looking at is matching up public service jobs with vacancies across Europe and coordinating that for the first time ever, and that's really to be welcomed. And maybe that's something that we could ask the Westminster Government representative when he's here later this morning, because I think it'd be interesting to know the detail of how that's actually going to work, because given that there's 1.5 million vacancies out there, I'm sure a lot of the unemployed people in this country would be very pleased to know where these jobs are, because they certainly don't seem to be in this neck of the woods. And I think that the other issue that's of some concern was under the regional state aids. I was very pleased that, you know, given all the lobbying that both this committee and other representatives, MSPs, made in the Parliament about the regional state aid rules, I was just a little bit concerned when I was reading the new guidelines, and the new guidelines appear to suggest that Commissioner Almunia, who's maybe putting down a marker for the future, because we have managed to hold on to those companies with more than 250 employees worldwide being able to get state aid, which obviously has been of some benefit to companies and areas in the United Kingdom. I was just very concerned when I read that it's going to carry, the Commission will carry out a detailed examination of large aid measures, focusing on their incentive effect, proportionality and contribution to regional development and effects on competition. I mean, I think that's a marker for the future. I think what he's saying there is, well, we didn't change the rules this time round, but I think he's maybe suggesting that he will change that in the future. And also the fact that member states are going to have to publish on the internet data on how much regional aid they get, the grant, and to whom. So that's quite good from the transparency point of view. I think the other issue that will be of a special interest to all of us is the youth guarantee schemes, about member states are being asked to accelerate the implementation of the youth guarantee schemes. And especially they're talking about front-loading of the €6 billion Youth Employment Initiative in order that the money is committed in 2014 and 2015. I think that's really good because, you know, given that I think we've got 89,000 unemployed young people in Scotland between 18 and 25. So that does occur to me as being something really helpful. There was something that I was wanting to pick up on in terms of the issue to do with the annual recommendations included on the stepping up measures to increase youth employment, in particular through the youth guarantee. I think maybe we could ask for further research and ask to what extent this is affecting Scotland, because it says here the Commission also called on the UK to increase the quality and length of apprenticeships to simplify qualification systems and to strengthen the engagement of employers, particularly in the provision of advanced and intermediate technical skills. I wouldn't have thought that would be an issue here in Scotland, but maybe that's something that someone in our Brussels office or someone in our SPICE team here could look at that, and that's particularly on page 4, just above the public employment services bit. And then on the other page, Convener, the Commissioner's proposal, I think they're talking about, in this instance, something really that I think is quite important, and that is this public employment service initiative that I've mentioned earlier. And I just think it would be something that, in terms of simplifying mobility, I think that that's going to, as we move on to the next section about professional qualifications, I really welcome the idea that we're going to help to simplify the mobility of professionals across the EU, because it does seem that despite all the hopes and aspirations that were had when the EU and the common market were first set up, we are not really quite there yet in terms of the professionals' mobility. So if we can achieve that, that's really very good. And then on the issue about the provisional agreement on the planned revision of the directive on the 12th of June, that's a directive on professional qualifications. I've highlighted a bit here about it was voted upon by the Parliament's Internal Market and Consumer Protection Committee, which will probably take place before the summer recess. And I just was wondering if our SPICE team can maybe update us, and that's on page 5, on what the situation, what the outcome of the vote was, because I think that would be quite helpful. And then on the issue of adoption of national, this is on the energy issue, the internal energy market. I think that there is an issue there about adoption of national strategies for the development of smart grids and rollout of smart meters, making use of regional policy funding and the rapid development of common standards at the EU level. I think that's really very good, but I did want to know a little bit more about the section where it says the phase out of subsidies to maturing renewables, because that could have an impact right across Scotland on many aspects of the work that we do here in Scotland, because clearly that's been a focus of your own government and indeed the Labour Party when it was in power as well. Very powerful area for Scotland's development. So if there's a suggestion that we're going to lose out on any subsidies there, then we need to be alert to that. And on the Trans-Europe transport, one of the things that I would be really keen to see is there was going to be a final agreed network maps will be published following formal endorsement of the deal by the Council and the European Parliament. I'd really like to see those maps sooner rather than later, because they must be in draft form, because I do remember at one stage many years ago there was a suggestion to leave one of the Trans-European network routes off of the map, and that was the main map that included the Forth road bridge. And so at that time, luckily we had some members of the European Parliament who were especially alert to that, but we should keep an eye on that. I think it was Ken Collins at the time who was really very vigilant, and he had a thought about that. One of the things in terms of European fundings in the issue of trans-European transport was in the Connecting Europe facility will be directed to these priorities. One of the things that I hope we, or the Parliament, somebody in the Parliament, maybe the appropriate committee could look at, is the relationship between these funds that are going to come in the Connecting Europe facility. To what extent is there a possibility that that would go to a third runway in London, to which I'm really opposed. I think that we should be getting better national hub airports developed right across the EU, and if the funding instead could go to that kind of initiative, whether it's in Manchester, Newcastle, Aberdeen or Edinburgh or Glasgow, I don't care, but I mean I think really the money should be directed to these areas. So I would hope that we could be very vigilant on that trans-European transport funding that's around, and I think that's really important. I think you'd be glad to know, Convener, that that was, I mean, I've got various other points raised, but I can maybe, if there's anything that worries me after the meeting, I can maybe raise it with the staff in the Parliament. Claps, thank you.
Comprehensive look at the Brussels Bulletin. A couple of things. I think Katie's taken a note of all the things that you've raised, Helen, but a couple of things. The issue around professional qualifications recognition ties into the directive that we had to deal with last week about the free movement of workers, and then when their qualifications are recognised. And I know the Economy Committee were looking at that and only had a very short period of time to deal with that issue last week as well. So a bit of a pattern being established there on some of these directives. So I think maybe we should speak to members of the Economy Committee and see what they did on the professional qualifications part of it, especially in work qualifications. The issue around the youth guarantee is something certainly I have spent a bit of time looking at over the past week or so. Within your papers, you would have received a letter from Angela Constance, the Youth Employment Minister, with quite detailed analysis of what's happening with the youth guarantee in Scotland, and an extremely helpful map, which I've just printed in black and white, but if you see it in colour, it shows you the differences across Europe on youth employment figures. I think that's extremely helpful. I'm a visual person, to see something like that actually allows me to understand it a bit better. So I would draw your attention to that information from the Minister, because I think that's very important and certainly something we'll follow up. But I had asked Ian in Spice to do a bit of work, and he's given me some information on the youth guarantee and the differences across the UK and across Europe. So I think maybe we should just share that with committee members, because certainly I raised some concerns myself about how the UK government were failing to implement the youth guarantee, and then the consequential impact that then has on employment figures. So a real concern there, and something that we should maybe take up as a discussion at our business planning away day in September, for maybe a bit of work in the autumn to follow that up. Yeah. One of the other things that jumped to my attention was the countrywide specific recommendations from the Commission. On the UK, there was issues raised around the limitation of the tax burden on labour, the reduction of gaps in employment protection between different types of work contracts. And what sprung to my mind there, and I think maybe this committee should raise it with the Scottish Youth Parliament, is that could actually be, and a bit of analysis needs to be done and a bit of investigation, but that could actually be a very powerful argument against the age discrimination and the minimum wage and the two-tier minimum wage. I think because it doesn't matter what age you are, but if your work contract suggests you should work those hours for that amount of pay, then there shouldn't be a two-tier UK minimum wage. I don't know, it may be grandiose of us to think like that, but I think we should actually look at that, because that may be a route to go. And I know that the Scottish Youth Parliament are doing a bit of work on this, so we should maybe bring that to their attention as something to follow through as well, but certainly something we can look at when we look at the whole picture in the autumn. Okay. Anything else from members? Hanzala?
Yeah, and thank you, Chair. It was just two small points. One was, in the last meeting I had suggested that we need to have someone that we can focus on who would give advice on fundings available in the European Union. I don't see anything in the paper about that whether we've appointed somebody or not, or identified somebody or a body that would do that, and we could circulate that information to organizations, and in particular schools and colleges. And the other item I'm looking at is the upcoming events and meetings in Brussels, and the one on the 15th of July is about Agriculture and Fisheries Council, and I'm just wondering if there's any representation either from this committee or this Parliament at this meeting, and if there isn't, should somebody consider. So all I'm saying is if either this committee or this Parliament is being represented at this meeting or not, and if not, perhaps we should consider that to happen.
Okay. We'll take note of the first request about EU funding. I think that's very, very important. The meeting on the 15th is the formal council, so that will be a UK-led delegation at ministerial level. In most cases, Richard Lochhead is that one? So
yeah.
We hopefully don't expect that to change. But
that wasn't my point. My point was to ensure that there was representation from whoever, because this is a very important issue for us up in Scotland. So whether it's a UK delegated or not, I would still want to be assured that there was somebody attending from representing our interest at that meeting.
Well, yes, I agree with you, but it's not within our gift. That's the problem. It's the UK, it's the member state, it's the UK that leads a delegation, therefore it's up to the UK who gets to be on that delegation.
Could we ask them if they could advise us if they're going to be represented at it?
I'm sure we could. Could ask the Minister later today. Yeah, add it to your list of questions. Okay, Rod.
The linguistic integration, the website created by the Council of Europe to foster a debate between policy makers and practitioners. I just really wondered, or perhaps we could inquire whether the Scottish Government was intent in participating in this website in any way from its own experience.
Okay, we should do that, yes. Jamie.
Just on investment services, on page 7, going on to page 8, I see there seem to be quite a lot of things being done with regard to organised trading facilities, a new type of trading venue, and things to do with the MIFID. I mean, just because of the sort of importance of the financial sector to Edinburgh, particularly, do we have any idea how our financial sector is actually responding to this, or what they're saying? I mean, it doesn't say whether it's good or bad, or and for that matter, for the UK economy too, where so much of invisible earnings is based on the City of London. There's no comment as to how this is being received.
Well, we could inquire. We'll inquire.
How can we do that?
Well, we can inquire through Scotland Europa, yeah?
Yes. Would that be all right to do that? Would that be okay to do that?
The other suggestion is speak to Owen Kelly, who's Scottish Financial Services, yeah?
Okay, thank you.
And we'll get some information back to you on that, Jamie.
Yeah.
Okay, Claire.
Yeah, just a comment on the section on page 7 on electronics, and the Commission putting some focus on the electronics industry across the EU. It's quite, I found it quite disturbing the way this was put. It was almost a declaration of not being able to compete in the international market on this level. So I'd maybe like a little bit more information about where the major competitors are in this area, because obviously going back to the youth unemployment area, one of the apprenticeship focuses is on technical skills. So obviously all of this in conjunction with the Horizon 2020 research money and the youth unemployment focus, I think there's, we should maybe put a highlight on the electronics opportunities that Scotland may have.
Okay. Something else to follow up? Okay, Willie.
Thanks very much, Convener. It was very much in the same line there as Claire mentioned, but could I draw your attention again to the MAF agreement and our concern previously about the huge cut to the broadband infrastructure budget, and I'm unclear if that is still part of the proposal. I imagine it was. Members might recall it was proposed that there would be something like an 88% cut in that budget. So when I see things in this paper, Convener, that Claire has mentioned there on electronics and the need to develop our capability to design and manufacture electronic components essential for the digital economy, it sounds really good, but I just get the impression from reading papers that the whole approach to the digital strategy and digital economy is a wee bit fragmented. You'll see from the figures that you've released or you've explained to us today that in Spain, for example, youth unemployment is as high as about 60%. And you also mentioned yourself about the UK and their attempts to implement Youth Guarantee Scheme, one component of which, according to this paper, is to invest in the digital job strategy for youth. So there's a whole number of opportunities there, perhaps, but I just get a sense that it's a wee bit fragmented, and I'm wondering if there's any way we can get a kind of broader brush picture of what the European Union or even the Commission's view is on the digital strategy, because on the one hand we hear about massive cuts to infrastructure, and on the other hand we hear about the pursuit of investment for youth and digital jobs opportunities and so on, and the two don't meet, in my view. So I wonder if there's an opportunity for us to try and get some kind of briefing or review of what the overall picture actually is.
We can certainly seek information from the Commission, but certainly another example of a question to raise with the Minister later today, I would suggest.
Really on that point, because I think he's absolutely right to keep going on about this, because I think it's something that, you know, given that there was 28 billion at one stage across the EU, you know, I'd like to know where all that money has gone, or if how much of it has been spent.
Okay. Okay, Willie?
Could I just follow up on that? I mean, the picture in Scotland in terms of youth unemployment we know is improving considerably compared even to the UK, but you really have to look at the figure for Spain, and that is really quite frightening. That was the picture I think that you showed, Convener. I think it's as high as 60% youth unemployment. Now, a strategy like that, a digital strategy with that kind of ambition for young people in the European Union really has to work, and I'm pleased to actually see that they've asked member states to accelerate the programme to front load that investment, and surely to goodness that will have a positive effect on countries like Spain who are suffering really badly in terms of youth unemployment.
Okay, thank you. Members content to send the Brussels Bulletin to the relevant committees and pick up all the issues. Katie's got 3 pages of issues now to chase up on the Brussels Bulletin, yeah? Happy to move on? Yep, agenda item 2 is a number of reports from the Scottish Government. There's 3 reports here, one on European funding, one on the transposition of EU directives, and one on Horizon 2020. If members have got any comments, if you've got any brief questions.
For me?
Yeah, certainly. Helen?
Yes, I mean, I think it's really very helpful that we've been given such detailed information on the funding side particularly, and I think it's something that perhaps we need to put some pressure both on the Scottish Government and particularly on the Westminster Government, because, you know, I haven't sat down and worked out a detailed calculation, but just a very rough calculation. I estimate that there's something like over €800 billion is available from these papers of what there is in the total EU budget, and the Scottish drawdown is something less than £5 billion, I estimate. Now, I'm sure that if there was people galvanised, focused and brought together both at Westminster level and at the Scottish level to really work at this issue, I'm sure we could do a whole lot better than this. It just strikes me as being lamentable that all of this money is available. And if we just take, for example, the Comenius monies that we've just finished our languages inquiry on, you know, there we discovered in the course of that inquiry that there was teachers who never heard or saw any of the publicity about the funding that's available. And I am certain that there is other funding that's available for students and for commerce and industry across Scotland that is available and that they're just not being made aware of. So I think everybody in Scotland and everybody in the United Kingdom has to work a whole lot harder on this issue of funding, because if it's there to be spent, if we discover through the efforts of Willie Coffey, myself and others that the 28 billion on broadband hasn't been spent, then it's because we're all not working hard enough on this issue. And we've really got to put this under a microscope and put ministers at our level, at the Scottish Parliament level, and at the Westminster level, and indeed our parliamentarians in the European Parliament, under great pressure to really make it much more publicly available, the information, what's available out there for everybody to draw down. But get people together, get academics, get industry and commerce and their industry groups and all the rest of it, really to home in on these issues of the funding. Thank you, Convener.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, and I think the more that we do inquiries and reports that include some form or thread of European funding, it certainly comes back to the original report that we did, where we suggested there should be some sort of a strategic central funding agency or organisation who does that type of work. They do the donkey work in the background, you know, the real hard slog of identifying funds and see where they match, but also doing some of the work about the PR work around, you know, how do we advertise this, how do we ensure that, for instance, Comenius is a perfect example, how do we ensure that every teacher in Scotland knows the opportunities that are there for them to use Comenius for their own personal and professional development. Yep. Anyone else? Rod?
On information not held by the Scottish Government. I was kind of curious to wondering whether that's because the Scottish Government's not really involved in some of these issues or what. But so there's some things that I hadn't actually even heard of before, like the Hercule 2 project to enhance cooperation to fight against fraud, and wondering, what on earth that actually is, and is there not anything in Scotland which would be something eligible for funding for that? Just kind of, it tells only part of the story. I'm not criticising it because there's a lot more information than we'd otherwise have, but
yeah, I think part of the problem is some of the projects are cross-border, so the information is not centrally held here, it's held at Westminster level, and certainly it's maybe something we should look into. And in other aspects of it, some of the drawdown for funding is for some aspects that are reserved matters like energy, which again, it's maybe a more UK-wide funding settlement rather than it being specific to Scotland.
Yeah, I picked the Hercule 2 programme because obviously Scotland has a separate legal system, and fraud certainly seems to imply to me some element of criminality, so I thought...
Roderick's absolutely right, because there's also the Trans-European networks on transport, and then it goes on the Marco Polo. Now, I know Marco Polo, we did draw down funding when we were getting the development of the Rosai through Zeebrugge ferry, and, the fact on the Trans-European networks, I really... I'm concerned about that, because at the time I did ask the Scottish Government way back 5-10 years ago as to what extent we were using these Trans-European network funds to develop road networks like the new Fourth Crossing. Now, as far as I'm aware, we never drew down a penny of funding from Europe on that, and we might have been eligible because that route was a Trans-European network route at one stage. So, I think that's where we have to really pile on the pressure and say this is just not good enough.
I think, this is a bit of a working document. The first draft we had didn't have as much information. This draft now has more information, and I think the clerks are consistently going back and seeking clarifications and updates. So hopefully this format will be populated as time goes on with much more information. But certainly the specific points that you've all raised, I think we should take those up and see if we can get some additional information on those. But certainly this is something that will come back to us, and the Scottish Government have agreed to do this for every 6 months. Or so, and come back to us with updates. So it allows us then, to see where the gaps are and try and see if we can find the information to fill those gaps.
Certainly compliment everyone, Convener, both our own clerks but also the government officials who have obviously done a lot of work in this, but it's critically important, and everybody must value this document and appreciate that there's, as you say, there's a whole lot more work for us to do in it.
Yep. Okay, Willie?
Thanks very much, Convener. I wonder if you could help clarify exactly what we mean by some of the information here. For example, if there's no drawdown by the UK, does that mean that Scotland can therefore not draw down its portion of that fund? Could I draw members' attention to page 9? There's an item there in the middle called the European Globalisation Adjustment Fund. Page 9, Jamie, page 9 of the table. It's a fund, it's a €500 million fund to provide one-off support to help individuals re-enter employment following redundancy as a result of globalisation. And you would imagine that there might be an opportunity there for the UK to draw down some of that. But you'll see there in the table that there's no drawdown by the UK and no drawdown by the Scottish Government. So I'm wondering if the UK doesn't draw down any funds, can we still apply to draw that down for Scotland? I would doubt that.
The columns actually suggest that the applications for funding are made by the member state. So
in that example there, then, are we in the UK missing a trick here and being the first instigator of applications to draw down funding? And the second comment I would make is that when you do see a drawdown allocation there, I would presume that's our allocation of our fair portion of the drawdown. So it's not an indication of failure in terms of the amount there. That's presumably Scotland's allocation from the drawdown total. But Mrs Edie's quite correct to point out when there's no drawdown by the UK, I think we should be alerting our colleagues in the Westminster Parliament to act on these matters.
For example, later on this morning.
Could I maybe comment on the European Globalisation Adjustment Fund, because that was one that we had in a previous paper from Ian McKeever, and I remember in that document the explanation that was given was it was actually going to cost the Westminster Government more pound for pound to draw the money down than it was to actually give us the benefit of it. Now, I think that merits a bit more work. I mean, I think that merits a bit more investigation, because it's a very convenient excuse for Westminster to say that. But I mean, if you took, for example, Halls of Broxburn, where there was, 1,000 redundancies, and because that fund was designed, I think, for examples where there was large-scale redundancies like that. Now, you know, there was millions of pounds that could have been drawn down, but the government's excuse was to not draw it down because it would have cost more pound for pound. I just think that's maybe a spurious excuse, and maybe it's something we should maybe ask the Minister this morning about. Yeah.
Yeah. Katie's just reminded me we are returning to our main focus of EU funding in the autumn, so certainly some of these very specific points will allow us to drill down into the whole funding setup, I think, and find out what's working, what's not working, and where the gaps are. Okay. Okay, anything else on the other reports from the Scottish Government? Transposition of directives seems to be pretty straightforward, and the Horizon 2020, I highlighted a wee bit of this for myself, because the report now for the FP7 programme, which is predecessor to Horizon 2020, suggests that Scotland secured funding of €484 million, which is only 1.5% FP7, but when you take that in the grand scheme of things, it's 10% of the UK allocation, which is proportionately on our population is us punching above our weight on that, and it demonstrates quite clearly, you know, the work that our universities have done in research and innovation, and builds, I think, a very, very good platform to looking at Horizon 2020 and how that then expands and reaches out into business and in creating economic growth as far as using our research and funding mechanism. So I just wanted to draw your attention to that we have maybe not been punching above our weight as far as for a UK level on some funds, as the discussion we've just had, but on others we certainly have been leading the way and hopefully continue to do so. But if members are content to move on from reports, if there's anything else we can always bring it up via correspondence. And moving on to agenda item 3, which is a report from our two members on the Committee of the Regions. You'll remember we conducted a short inquiry into the make-up of the Committee of the Regions and which delegates should go, and we recommended and nominated members for the Committee of the Regions, and both of them have sent us a report. It's been about a year, I think, since we did that. And the report this time has been compiled by Stuart Maxwell, because he was a continuing member of the Committee of the Regions. Patricia Ferguson has been a relatively new member to the Committee of the Regions, has been recently nominated, and I think it takes about a year to go through the process to be there properly. So Stuart Maxwell, MSP, has put together this report on behalf of him and Patricia will do the next one on behalf of her and Stuart. So if I can refer you to paper 3 and the information, which is a very detailed report from both our members, and invite any comments or questions. Jamie?
Well, I'm meant to be an alternate member, but as you'll see from his thing in paragraph 4 of Stuart Maxwell's letter, we only had one member who was eligible to attend COR meetings, which was him, but that position has now changed. I don't quite understand why. Anyway, I was only offered one date, which was what date I couldn't. I think it was June 19th, and I had to stand in at the Rural Committee that day, so I haven't been able to attend it, I regret to say. But I'm sure it does a great job.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think before, I think maybe some of these other outside organisations and bodies that we have members sitting on, we didn't quite join up, especially just in information sharing, and hopefully this report and the feedback that we have now from the members will allow us to do that and be a bit more strategic in our thinking, especially, you know, I think at Committee of the Regions level, there's things being discussed.
I'll wait until I get a chance.
Yeah. Yeah, I think at Committee of the Regions levels, there's certainly things being discussed and debated that are certainly relevant to this committee, but there maybe wasn't that avenue of communication open, and that now I think is opened. And certainly I had a conversation with Stuart and Patricia last week, and both of them are very, very keen to feedback in anything that they felt, you know, we should take up in this committee, so they're happy to do that. Any other questions or comments on this topic? Not.
It's a very full report with lots of topics covered in the reports, and clearly many of them very relative to the work here in the Parliament, and so it's very good to see the connections that are made from the Parliament to there and then back again. That's good.
Yep. Members content to write to both Stuart and Patricia thanking them for the report and looking forward to the next one? Yep. Thank you very much. And moving on to the Council of Europe, Congress of Regional and Local Authorities in Europe, to which I am the full-time member and Helen is the alternate. And because of business, we've been back and forward, both of us, over the past year. And I'll give you a wee update on the very, very recent meeting I was at a few weeks ago, on the 12th of June. I sit on the Governance Committee of the Congress, and I've got a brief synopsis of the meeting in Strasbourg that happened there, and there was some very good debates. There was a very good debate and a report given on regions and territories with special status in Europe and how that's been developed, and there was a very good exchange of views, and there'll be draft recommendations coming forward for the next meeting in October, and a draft EM explanatory memorandum was adopted as well, so we should have that, and I can certainly share that with the committee, because I think that's something, especially for Highlands and Islands, where, you know, we would hope they would still maintain that sort of a special status, that we can look at that. There was the Towns and Regions group had put together a very good report on a pact to stop sexual violence against children, which included all sorts of sexual violence, including trafficking, and they have proposed and been campaigning for a campaign called 1 in 5, because the statistics suggest that 1 in 5 children will be subject to some form of violence or abuse in their childhood, which is quite scary. And some of the local authorities in the regions, devolved regions and countries across Europe, have adopted the 1 in 5 campaign and attached it to their government websites. So I have written on to the Scottish Government here, suggesting that the Scottish Government do the same. And we have the link to the website with absolutely, the website's very, very detailed and has lots of area and geographical specific information, but certainly something if right across Europe we can join up on and sharing that information, and certainly supporting that campaign. That would allow us to tackle some of the cross-border issues, especially around about trafficking and the most topical update right now on sort of the use of the internet and child abuse images and things. So if we can get a very good joined up European strategy on that, then certainly we could reduce the incidence and hopefully reduce it from 1 in 5. Okay, that was a very good debate that day as well. There was also a report given on effective trans-frontier cooperation in Europe, which again, interesting enough, there seem to be no real barriers across Europe, apart from, you know, sometimes cultural barriers, but they were looking at how do we reduce that, how do we make it better, and that was in the whole thing about trade, about culture, and about geography as well, and transport links, which was very, very interesting. There's another draft resolution coming to the full Congress in October, and an explanatory memorandum, which I'll share as soon as I have them. And a couple of follow-up resolutions a couple of thematic on the rights of local authorities to be consulted at other levels of government. And there was also a citizen participation at local and regional level in Europe, and an exchange of views were held on that, and these will be again brought up for more discussion at the October meeting. And there was a discussion held on possible topics. There was one discussion held on strengthening democracy across regions in Europe, which the full UK delegation led by our friends in Ireland and backed up by our friends in both Cambridge and Liverpool, and then followed up by myself. The report suggested that some of the conflict around Catalan and Basque region and other parts of Europe was a danger to democracy, and had lumped the devolution settlements of the UK into that same category. So from very robust exchange of views from Irish colleagues and our English colleagues, and then backed up by myself, we have managed to get changes to that report that suggests that the devolution settlements across the UK are respectful, they're peaceful, they're negotiated, you know, and certainly I commended our First Minister and the Prime Minister on the Edinburgh Agreement and how that process has been taken forward, and they can't just lump, you know, any quest for further devolution or full independence with the same into the same category as some of the much less democratic means that have been taken forward in other parts of Europe. So we've managed to get changes to that, which I think the whole UK delegation were very united on that, and very proud of the fact that any devolution settlement we've got in any process towards referendum is a peaceful, respectful and agreed process. So that was a good catch, because I think that report could have went through without us actually realising that until my Irish colleague picked that up. So that's quite a comprehensive, because it was a very comprehensive meeting, update on in the last meeting I was at, and I think Helen's got a wee update on the meeting she was at before that one, yeah?
Yes, I'm very pleased to have been able to attend the CLARI meetings as an alternate member, and just for the sake of members who maybe don't know, CLARI is a pan-European assembly of politicians who meet regularly, and there are 636 members of it, and they may be councillors, mayors or presidents of regional authorities representing over 200,000 authorities in 47 member states. So it's a bit separate from the European Union, which obviously just got 27 member states. So it has got 47 member states. And since being appointed by the Scottish Parliament as an alternate member in February 2012, there have been 3 Congress meetings since then, and I've attended 2 of the Congress meetings, and there's been 3 Governance Committee meetings, and I've attended 2 of them, and 3 special project meetings in Albania. The Congress has 2 chambers, and one is the Chamber of the Regions and the other is the Chamber of the Local Authorities, and all Congress meetings are held in Strasbourg. I attended the last meeting of the Congress in Strasbourg together with Councillor Harry McGuigan, who was the COSLA representative, and Councillor McGuigan was accompanied by a COSLA official who kindly assisted me in the course of the Congress. It's interesting to note the Scottish Parliament to date has not volunteered officer assistance at the Congress meetings. COSLA's official was very helpful, though. There are national delegation meetings and the political grouping meetings of the Congress. And the UK national delegation is led by Councillor John Warmisham of Manchester City Council. And since my attendance at the Governance Committee meetings, I've been requested by the executive of the Congress to represent them at Project Albania meetings held in Tirana. I have attended 3 of the special project meetings in the past year, and the key purpose is to help strengthen local democracy in that country. There are many who would like Albania to become a candidate country for the European Union membership. There was a general election in Albania during the past weekend, and the Socialists won a landslide victory and defeated the Conservative Party. They had been seeking a 3rd term in office, and the Socialists stood in a manifesto striving to achieve EU membership. So I do wish them very well in that aspiration. And at the Congress meetings which I've attended, I have been impressed by the work of the committees and its rapporteur system. In particular, I would like to single out the work concerning the Roma, because I think the Roma is really very important, and they have produced some key reports on that. And I think they too would be worthy, Convener, of having links to our various websites, both from the Scottish Government perspective, but also from the Scottish Parliament's perspective as well, because they're very worthy, very excellent reports. And I'd also like to highlight the work concerning sex trafficking as well. I think it's a subject very close to your own heart, and that too is something that I think would be worthy of getting that report linked up. And the Congress has struck me as being very much like a party conference, but the difference, of course, is there's not just one party at the Congress. There's all the parties that are represented there, and they've got stalls and side meetings taking place in the lunch and evening breaks, and the member states are eligible to send delegations to all of these events as well, and all the delegations comprise a mixture of different political parties, and the considerable effort is placed on promoting the monitoring of elections and the specialist training of observers. That's one of its core functions, is about making sure that, you know, the peace and democracy agenda is something that's very strong in the Council of Europe. And of course there are delegations of observers go to many elections across the 47 member state areas. And there are three main committee areas. One's in governments, and one is monitoring and current affairs. One is monitoring and the other one is current affairs. And the principal thrust of the work is, I say, about peaceful and democratic progress in all the 47 member states by sharing knowledge and experience. And there are many senior politicians who attend the Congress and its committees, and there are numerous opportunities to socialise and make connections with very diverse individuals. And my special project work in Albania has brought me into contact with a number of the special experts appointed by the Congress with the elected members, and from numerous regions, and in particular Russia, Estonia, Ireland, Sweden, Finland, Bulgaria and Romania, as well as UK elected members. That's some of the very special areas that are being involved. And I am expected to return to Albania again in September once the atmosphere surrounding the general election has settled down. So thank you, Convener.
Thank you very much. Any questions or comments from members? No? Willie?
Aye, thanks very much. Very comprehensive update from both of you, so congratulations and thank you. On the strengthening democracy agenda, I wonder if there was any discussion around the theme that I've mentioned at this committee previously, in terms of strengthening public accountability within the systems and processes of either established governments like Albania or emerging new states like neighbouring Kosovo and so on. And that has arisen in terms of my interest, Convener, because of the visits we've had to this Scottish Parliament from a number of these new states. So has there been any discussion in that wider agenda about how to set up proper scrutiny and accountability systems for the new emerging governments to further aid, you know, the kind of democratic accountability that I'm sure they strive to achieve?
I think that there is a number of projects, and I think when countries like Albania are expressing an interest in joining the EU, and the EU's obviously main thrust is about enlargement, then that's when you get projects like Project Albania. And certainly there's bits of work going on in Kosovo, Montenegro, Serbia. There was delegates from all of these areas at the last Congress meeting, you know, talking about what they need. Certainly, I know the Westminster Foundation for Democracy are doing some of that work as well, around governance standards, procurement, financial transparency, financial where it's, you know, standards and scrutiny. Yeah, so there's bits of work like that absolutely going on. But certainly, if you're minded, we can raise it at the next Congress meeting. If depending on if it's me or Helen that's there, we're happy to do that.
If I could just add to that, Convener, I mean, I think I share your interest really in Serbia and Kosovo, and you're always in my mind's eye when we're talking about these things in Serbia, because you do meet people either at the lunch breaks or in some of the committee meetings, etc., who are talking about these things. And for example, at the Albania situation, you would know that just about 12 years ago, I think it maybe was, there was a great influx of refugees coming in from Kosovo. I think there's about 250,000 nearly, and that was a massive problem for them. So of course, the Council of Europe and the CLARI is very alert to these issues. But your point about setting up systems and scrutiny, of course, is something that's core to the democratic accountability issues that are raised in the committee work that's there as well. And the rapporteurs who speak when they give reports to the Congress, they go into great detail about the type of work that's there. And I'm sure that if you wanted any more detailed documentation, there's a whole range of reports on their website. We could perhaps check out their website for you and see what's there specifically about Serbia and Kosovo, and that would maybe help you further that interest as well.
At the back of that, I think I've also raised this myself historically, is that the concerns that I had about the failure of democracy in Greece, Italy, and other European Union states are facing just now, and that is where governments are being set up who have not been democratically elected, and they have been accepted as democratically elected governments, and that's just totally outrageous and unacceptable in today's day and age. And we need to deal with this issue, because if we don't, we will see this expand in other parts of Europe as well. And one of the things that we've always held very dearly is the high standards of democracy that we have in Europe, and how we engage with democratic governments around the world. And we have certain standards, and we're very quick to point out shortcomings of other countries. Yet now we see within Europe countries who've set up governments, and those governments have been accepted without an election, and that can't be healthy for us. And I think we really need to make sure that before we look at expansion, is we consolidate our current position to make sure that we don't allow this cancer to grow almost, because it is a cancer. These are people who are not representing anybody, and we've accepted them as legal representatives of those countries, and that's not on. And I think we need to make that point to the Minister. I'll be making that point to the Minister as well today.
Okay. I think it's a point that we've raised in the past about the consequence of crisis and recession is the main victim in some countries has been democracy, and that's something that we should all be very, very mindful of. On the issue around Kosovo, we've got a briefing coming up in autumn around Kosovo, and I think maybe to add to that briefing, we should maybe look at some of the mechanisms that are in place from the Congress and other European institutions, and how they are supporting and nurturing the processes. Yeah. Okay. Happy to move on to agenda item 5. Agenda item 5 is very rarely a piece of subordinate legislation that we have in committee, and you've got a paper here, I think it's paper 4, on the instrument, which is the European Union Amendment in respect of the accession of Croatia Scotland Regulations 2013. I think we'll be delighted that one of the first pieces of sub-leg that we have done in this session on this committee is on a new member state and making life a bit more straightforward in that case. I think if people have read the paper, I don't know if you need me to read out a wee bit about the regulations. It basically make consequential amendments to legislation to give effect to the accession of the Republic of Croatia to the European Union. And the regulations will come into force on the 1st of July, which is very soon. Any comments or questions from members? Any points of clarification?
Just look forward to it coming.
Hans-Alex, sorry, Hans-Alex?
Yeah, I'm just looking forward for it to being established, so that we can actually have a look at it and see how that actually works out, because we have concerns about various states and so on. So I think this will be a good opportunity for us to actually have a look at something that has come to us in recent days, or will be in recent days because it's coming in 1st of July. That gives us an opportunity to look over it during the recess and form an opinion.
Okay, Jamie. Sorry.
So is that me? Yes. Yeah, I just wanted to, for clarification, are they keeping their own currency? Are they keeping the yuan, or are they going into the euro?
Join the euro on the 1st of, yeah.
They are definitely.
Yeah, I was there just, and I spoke with the representatives, yeah.
Rod.
I'm a bit confused by what Gonzalez was saying. This is just a statutory instrument. We're basically being invited to make no recommendation. I can't quite tie it into what you were saying, Hansela. But
Well, what I'm saying is that we will learn and experience through them to see how they benefit from this, and then see how that relates to
Croatia's accession to the EU. Yeah, right. Yeah. But, yeah, we should just be a bit clearer for official report.
So just to make it absolutely clear, I need the committee to agree that there's no recommendation to make on this. It is a negative instrument, but if there's no recommendation to make, then we can notify the government of that. Members happy to do that? Yep. Okay, our next agenda item is agenda item 6, where we will be discussing European affairs with the UK Minister. However, that's not scheduled to start 10:15, so members have a brief recess, have a cup of tea, and gather your thoughts and your questions for the meeting with the Minister, and I'll see you back about just before 15:15 then, so we're all in our seats and ready to go. Okay, thank you. Good morning and welcome back to the European and External Relations Committee this morning. Our final agenda item 6, is a discussion on European affairs, and we're hearing evidence this morning from the Minister of State for Europe, and I'd like to welcome back to committee the Right Honourable David Lidington, who is the Minister of State for Europe from the UK Government, and with him today is Annie McGee, who is the head of the Devolution Unit, and Tim Hemmings, who is the head of the EUD Internal and it says sorry, Tim, department. Yeah, the briefing's a bit off here. Minister, I believe you have an opening statement.
Convener, thank you very much indeed, and it's good to be back here with the committee again. Since our time is limited, I will sort of shorten the prepared remarks to try and give members of the committee as much time as possible for the points and questions that you want to discuss. I think the last time I was here, which was February 2012, it was the Eurozone crisis that was uppermost in the minds of politicians throughout the European Union. That has not gone away, but the sense of immediate urgency that infected Europe at that time, I think, has diminished, largely following the decisions that the President of the European Central Bank announced and implemented last year. Although it's fair to say that there is still an ongoing debate amongst our friends in the Eurozone about how exactly they are going to construct a way of integrating more closely their fiscal and economic arrangements to support and bring stability and growth back to their currency union. And it's very much in the interests of the United Kingdom, though we're not going to join the euro, that that is done in a way which is successful and allows those major trading partners and allies of ours to return to growth and prosperity. Since I last attended this committee, the Prime Minister has outlined a United Kingdom approach to Europe and made it clear that he considers that the national interest is best served by the United Kingdom remaining within a reformed European Union. The key reforms which are needed are to increase Europe's competitiveness, to provide for greater flexibility, and to improve Europe's democratic legitimacy. Competitiveness is vital. If we look at the world, we see a shift of economic power and weight moving away from Europe towards the emerging economies of Latin America and Asia, and we see the competitiveness gap between the United States and Europe starting to open up again after a period in which the gap appeared to shrink. And frankly, Convener, unless Europe raises its game on competitiveness and does so dramatically, the next generation of European citizens won't be able to afford the standards of living, the social protection or the public services that our voters throughout Europe take for granted today. And that's the whole agenda about the single market, about trade, about smarter and less burdensome regulation on business, particularly on SMEs. Secondly, on flexibility. The creation of the single currency and the economic logic of a currency union requiring greater economic and fiscal integration is driving a dynamic for change. We have to seek ways in which to make it possible for those countries who wish and need to integrate their arrangements more closely to do so freely, while at the same time preserving those things that are of enormous value in the Europe of 27 or, in a few days' time, I'm happy to say 28 member states. And a start has been made on that through the negotiations on the creation of the single supervisory mechanism, but there is a great deal of work to be done. How do you have a more closely integrated currency union while at the same time preserving the integrity of a single market, particularly in financial services, and asserting the duty of the European institutions to be speaking for the interests of every member state and not any one particular subset? And third, on democratic legitimacy. We are all too aware of the sense of disaffection with the EU and European decisions in the United Kingdom. But this is a phenomenon we see around Europe. We saw a third of French voters last year supporting Mrs. Le Pen or Monsieur Mélenchon in the first round of their presidential elections. We have seen the Five-Star Movement in a pivotal role in the Italian election results. We have seen Syriza harness a genuine public grievance against the EU, amongst many other things, to displace the main centre-left force in Greek politics. And much more worryingly, we have seen in the form of Jobbik or Golden Dawn the re-emergence of political trends of a kind that we hoped had been buried for good in this continent. And so I think Europe needs to think very hard about how to make its decisions more democratically accountable, as the Prime Minister set out, as the Foreign Secretary and I have tried to say in more recent speeches. We believe that the way in which that needs to be addressed is chiefly, not solely, but chiefly through a reassertion of the role of the European Council and the Council amongst the institutions, and critically, a more important role for national parliaments in holding European decisions to account. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I think there's many questions come from that. I'm going to open with a quick one from myself, just on the sort of a process of the Foreign Commonwealth Office. I believe the devolution unit is a new entity within the Foreign Commonwealth Office, and I'm just wondering if you could give us some insight into the function of that and how it works across all the devolved competencies. I think maybe Annie's can give us that information herself. Yes?
I think that Annie is the sort of operational head of this, is probably best placed to talk you through the detail, Convener.
Okay, thank you.
Our devolution unit's been in operation since September last year, and I head the unit. It's a very small team. Our focus is with working with Scottish Government and the Welsh and the Northern Ireland Executive on their interests in foreign policy in particular, and also visits overseas where I make sure that things run smoothly, and cooperation with our posts is given its utmost, and things go as smoothly as they should do. I also liaise very closely with colleagues in territorial offices as well. So it's working with colleagues in the Scottish Government and the Welsh and the Northern Irish, the territorial offices, and with colleagues overseas to make sure areas of interest are able to be explored in the way that they should be.
Okay, thanks for that. Minister, when you were at committee last year, you had suggested ways of strengthening communications and joint working across all the devolved nations in the UK. And I wondered, is the devolution unit a response to that? Or is it got a remit and an agenda that's maybe a bit wider than that?
It's partly sort of the response, and I wouldn't say it's the whole response to that, because this is work in progress. It's about trying to build a working culture between the United Kingdom government and the devolved administrations, where we are able to cooperate effectively on European policy, acknowledging that there will, on various issues, be political differences between the elected leaders in different administrations. But I think that we've seen there is a need in the FCO to have a small coordinating function here. The Foreign Secretary, as chair of the European Affairs Committee of the Cabinet, I, in my role as Minister for Europe, while we don't have the lead policy role in absolutely every EU dossier, we have an overarching responsibility to Parliament and the country for the conduct of our European policies. And it is our job as a department from time to time to go to other departments in Whitehall and say, well, have you considered how your particular department's approach affects what the government may be trying to do elsewhere on the European agenda? Or are you pitching your arguments in the most Europe-friendly way? Have you thought about talking to this other member state government or seeing these MEPs and so on? And I think that the unit that Annie heads gives a bit more sort of focused support to that role of coordination, particularly as regards the interests of the devolved administrations. Every UK minister, when he or she submits to the European Affairs Committee a proposed negotiating position for a new directive or regulation, is required as part of the sort of list of checks to state what the interests of the devolved administrations are, if any, and whether there are particular problems, challenges that there might be. And so again, and his unit can just keep an eye on that. So that, is that job being done effectively? Can support Foreign Office ministers in our roles as the chairs of the JMCE meetings and the like, and support, and indeed make sure that we are coordinated in supporting devolved administration ministers or officials when they are engaged in other countries. The First Minister's going, I think, to Beijing a bit later this year. Now, our embassy in Beijing is well geared up for that. There's a very good team there, but particularly if we were talking about a Scottish or Northern Ireland minister going to a smaller post where they had less experience, this again, having that small central team is quite useful.
Okay, thanks for that. The work in progress that you've mentioned, will there be a strand or a thread of that work that will include looking at Scotland's future and as far as looking forward to the referendum?
We're certainly feeding into the exercise that the Scotland Office and the Deputy Prime Minister have been leading about the UK government's approach to the referendum. And as you know, there's a series of papers of studies which are being published that set out the analysis of the United Kingdom government based upon legal and academic advice and setting out our considered opinion. And certainly what has been published in respect of foreign policy implications, membership of international organisations and so on, that's something in which Foreign Office officials have been very much engaged.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we're going to open to questions, and we have many areas to cover this morning, so we'll try and be as succinct as possible to get as many of those areas covered as possible. Helen Eady.
So I will try to be very short, Convener. The first question, and good morning, Minister, nice to have you here. I think one of the things that Scots would claim is that they have a very strong belief in having friendship, extending hands of friendship to all parts of the world. And in particular, I mean, we do a lot of work with Malawi, and I mean, that's been at the forefront of the work. But I think that in the context of Europe, I mean, one of the poorest part of Europe is undoubtedly Bulgaria, followed by Romania and other countries. And in this very room on Tuesday night, we set up a Friends of Europe. Jamie McGregor and other MSPs were at that meeting. And one of the issues that came up at that particular meeting was, why is it that there's not more direct air links to places like Scotland? Because at the moment, every Scot has to go via Luton or Stansted or Heathrow, and you're busy trying to set up a third runway at Heathrow, and there's many of us who would say here, no, we don't want an extra air runway at Heathrow. What we want are more airport connections in a direct way. So, I mean, I think your British ambassador in Bulgaria is doing a tremendous job. But the people here in Scotland, I think, would like to see a lot more direct air links. So what will your government do to try?
Well, I do have a lot of sympathy for that, because I have to say, speaking as Europe Minister, I find it amazingly frustrating how few flights direct there are from London to certain Central European and Eastern European capitals. If I'm trying to go to the Baltic states or parts of the Balkans, it takes me the best part of the day because I'm having to change at Munich or Frankfurt or somewhere. There are limited number of minutes you want to spend looking at the Moomin shop in Helsinki while you're sort of in transit. But at the end of the day, these are commercial decisions. Now, I think that the trend is that over time there have been more direct flights from Edinburgh and Glasgow to European destinations. I think that it tends to be the low-cost airlines, and it's the likes of EasyJet and Wizz Air and so on that have been opening up the new routes. I've been for example, flown Luton to Gdansk on a couple of occasions, and those planes are full, going in each direction.
If I may just interrupt you, Minister, just to ask you how you can incentivise operators, because I mean, I think at the end of the day, you know, it's one thing to put massive subsidies into building new runways, but it's quite another thing that could be more direct help to actually help to incentivise the airport operators to bring these services to the regions.
Well, it's a matter for airlines and for airport operators of deciding on what what the right balance is between charging for available slots, you know, and what the airlines, for their part, think they can recover by way of fares from their passengers, and that's a commercial decision. I mean, I think that when it comes to promotional activity, I mean, tourism and transport are devolved matters, so there are some instruments that would be in the hands of this Parliament and of the Scottish Government. I think that, you know, since the development of a single market in aviation, and we have seen, you know, a significant reduction in internal airfares within Europe, and that has helped the development of new routes that previously had not existed. I'm sure that my colleagues in the Department for Transport could identify additional areas where further liberalisation could help drive that further. You know, I'm somebody who's certainly a sceptic about, you know, state aids to flag-carrying airlines and so on. I think the way forward is the low-cost airlines and allowing them to respond freely to passenger demand.
Convener, if I could just follow on with that and say that, Minister, we've got documents in front of us. It's work that's been done by this committee that tells us exactly how much money is available across EU budget lines. There's something like £800 billion plus available to draw down from Europe. And Scotland's share of that is something over just £5 billion of that. Now, I think my concern is that when it comes to things like trans-European route networks, there's absolutely no drawdown in some parts of the UK. And I think that's something that I believe that Westminster needs to answer for. And I'm asking you to answer, why is it that you're not doing more intensive work to draw down some of the money that's available within Europe, and it's something that we've had massive redundancies here in Scotland. If we can just look at the Global Investment Fund for a moment, because the Global Investment Fund could have been used in the case of Halls of Brockburn, but we were told that the government at Westminster has its excuses for not drawing down money from that. Now, we're talking about in excess of £500 million could have been drawn down for Scotland's benefit, and you're not drawing down any of that money. Now, you're always going on about the shortage of public money. We could get pound for pound matched funding, and it just seems to me that the efforts of the Westminster Parliament as member state is just really lacking in this regard. So, you know, can you answer that question?
Well, of course, the new financial framework for the next 7 years is, I hope, in the final stages of negotiation now. That will include an overall increase, despite a welcome cut in the framework sums, an increase for the trans-European infrastructure programmes. But TENS only pays a relatively small percentage of the costs involved, and those costs that are funded by member states have to be met out of money taken from taxpayers, and in our case we are looking unavoidably at a situation in which this government at Westminster has inherited a very large level of structural deficit and is having to address that.
Minister,
and I can just finish.
If I could just interrupt,
and that
we're
means
talking about £28 billion of money that's available for broadband across the whole of Europe. You have only drawn down £375 million as a Westminster government. Why is it when there's £28 billion has been available up to now that you have only drawn down £375 million?
Yeah.
Helen, I think we're privileged that we have those figures right in front of us because it was a piece of work that we did earlier at committee. And I wonder if you can answer, Minister, that would be very helpful. If you can't right now, then we'd be happy to take some
I think
follow-up evidence.
perhaps the sensible thing, particularly as these do lie with, these are detailed figures which, in Westminster and Whitehall terms, do involve other departments as the lead policy issues. If I consult those departments, then perhaps write to you, Convener, with a more detailed reply.
And the key point is there's masses of funding available across Europe, £800 billion in excess of, and we as a country, as the United Kingdom, are drawing down so little, and that's really the key point here. I just want to hear if you're willing to put in more efforts to drawing down that funding.
Well, I will take those points up with the relevant ministers.
Okay, thank you very much. Jimmy McGregor.
Thank you. Minister, welcome. Recently, following on from the Irish Presidency's agreement over the MAF, 960 billion budget, I noticed that the UK government has announced how the structural funds for the UK will be allocated across the four nations of England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. And the UK government has decided to use its own formula rather than the European one. Luckily, it seems, because such a formula is much more beneficial in financial terms to Scotland in particular than the EU formula would have been. Can you comment on that? And also, could we use the UK formula more often, if that's the case?
Well, we announced the indicative structural funds allocation across the UK in March this year. And of course, I do have to emphasise these figures are indicative at the moment until the MFF and the accompanying regulations have been finally agreed. And when we looked at how different parts of the UK would be affected by applying the EU formula to the overall MFF indicative figures, they would have given Scotland a cut of 22% compared with the current framework. We didn't think that was right. There were discussions in which Michael Moore and David Mundell were obviously fighting Scotland's corner hard in the internal government discussions in Whitehall, and the other territorial ministers were having their say, and the outcome was a decision to apply a 5% cut to the overall allocations for each of the four countries in the United Kingdom, which we thought that was overall a just compromise outcome. We're now looking, obviously, at how that 5% cut and the indicative sum for Scotland should be applied across Scotland. Reluctantly, I can't give the committee the answers today, but I can say that on the order paper for the House of Commons this morning, there is notice of a written ministerial statement by the Treasury, which should be published later today, which ought to set these figures out. So, I perhaps sort of suggest to the committee those figures will be available very soon.
Thank you very much. Can I just, my colleague mentioned broadband. I did notice in a previous paper which this committee received that the allocation of funds for broadband had actually, from Europe, had actually been severely cut. This is a matter, especially I appreciate for mentioning my own region, which is the Highlands and Islands. It's an absolutely vital issue, and also across rural parts of the UK everywhere, I would have thought, in order to get growth going. And will you please try and get more money for broadband for the regions?
Yeah. I mean, the overall, the UK government, UK taxpayers are investing more than £500 million in broadband, including, of course, in Scotland. But I mean, the point Mr. McGregor makes is well understood, and certainly I can see that for the rural areas, the Highland areas of Scotland, that is particularly important. I'll make sure that those points go back to my colleagues in DCMS and BIS.
Thank you very much.
Rod?
Morning, Minister. A previous Conservative Prime Minister said he wanted the United Kingdom to stay at the heart of Europe, to be at the heart of Europe. In the light of the reform agenda, is that still a tenable objective for this government?
I think that yes, it's a straightforward answer, and I would say that if you look at what has happened, the way in which we've got Prime Minister Cameron, Chancellor Merkel working very closely indeed together for the successful launch of the trade negotiations with the United States, the successful conclusion during the lifetime of this UK government of EU free trade deals with South Korea and with Singapore, the shift last year to a new default position of exempting micro businesses from new EU regulations, through to the long overdue changes agreed this year in the common fisheries policy, to an unprecedented cut in the multi-annual financial framework, first time the EU has ever done that. I think you can see UK influence still very much being felt. I'd also say that while, and I'm not going to pretend that there is a unanimity of view amongst EU heads of government about the way forward, I have found a real appetite amongst my counterparts and their prime ministers for a serious debate about the future of Europe. The Dutch government last week published what they termed an inventory of competencies, their own sort of internal review of the current balance of competencies, that said in terms that they thought that the era of ever closer union was over. Chancellor Merkel has said that she thinks that that Commission initiatives are sometimes just too intrusive and detailed and doesn't want more of that sort of intrusive rulemaking. When I was in Copenhagen earlier this year, I had an hour with the Danish Parliament Europe Committee, who were launching their own inquiry into a stronger role for national parliaments in holding EU decisions accountable. So I think there is this appetite for change, a recognition that change is certain, right around Europe, and we need to try and help shape that debate.
Perhaps you could just expand or clarify on what the UK government's intention is in its review of competences.
Yes, it's to provide the opportunity for business, for the devolved administrations, for other interest groups in our society to comment and submit evidence, subject area by subject area, on every aspect of European Union activity, with a view to compiling a set of reports which will set out what that evidence shows. And these reports will not produce policy recommendations. It will be for political parties and others to use the evidence as a quarry from which to build their own policy positions on the basis of whatever conclusions they draw from the evidence. So I am expecting, I have the advantage of having seen the first 6 in draft, they'll be published within, I hope, the next few weeks. I have the advantage of knowing that these reports will resemble, in many respects, a parliamentary select committee report. That they have to be written on the basis of the evidence, and they have to give due weight to evidence even where that evidence is in contention. So that, for example, the report on taxation does draw out the fact that there is a tension between, on the one hand, the interest of transnational businesses in having a set of European-wide arrangements on tax that makes it easier for them to plan their business and reduces transaction costs, and on the other hand, the concern of national governments to have control over their own revenue and to insist on the principle of tax sovereignty and accountability to national parliaments. And there's a political choice to be made there. And the report sort of flags up that there are differences of interest and there is a choice that politicians eventually have to make.
given that what you've said over the last 5 minutes or so, is that kind of good work possibly being undone by kind of European reaction to the in-out referendum proposed by the Prime Minister in January? Or?
I think most of our European colleagues both are familiar with referendums. The Irish Europe Minister, after the Prime Minister's speech, said, well, our experience is that referendums do focus the minds of voters upon the issues concerned. I think that the reality is that this question mark over the UK's membership is there anyway. The way to resolve this definitively is to put the issue to a public vote, to do so at a time when the future direction of Europe and the prospects for reform are much clearer than they are today. And that is what lies behind the approach the Prime Minister has taken. In this respect, I mean, I do emphasise, as leader of the Conservative Party, that element of his speech is not a coalition policy, although what he said about European reform has the full support of the entire coalition.
Jamie, do you want to come in with a brief
on
supplementary on the Dutch report?
On the point of what the Dutch, the subsidiarity review, which it calls it, I think, they're obviously attempting to sort of curb EU power in certain areas, but without changing the treaty as such. I mean, is there room there for cooperation between your government and the Dutch government in trying to achieve the same aims?
I mean, there's very close cooperation, and the Prime Minister and the Deputy Prime Minister both speak regularly to Prime Minister Rutte of the Netherlands. I find in many of my council meetings that Frans Timmermans, the Dutch Foreign Minister, is lining up on the same side of the argument as I am on issues to do with trade, competitiveness, control of expenditure, and so on. It's never been my contention or the Prime Minister's contention that treaty change is the only way to secure reform. There are many reforms, beneficial reforms to the EU, that we can achieve and indeed are achieving without treaty change. But I do think that at some stage in the next few years, treaty change is going to be both necessary and desirable. And I think we shouldn't forget that President Barroso, the Four Presidents' report, all suggest that what the Eurozone needs to do cannot ultimately be done without treaty change, and that the fiscal compact contains within its wording an aspiration within 5 years to roll that compact into the European Union treaty structure as a whole. So there will be others who I think will see the imperative for that.
Really, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Claire Adamson.
Thank you. Good morning, Minister. You mentioned in your opening statement that David Cameron wants to negotiate from within the EU the change in what he has been described as the new settlement, but we don't have at the moment any detail about the new settlement at all and what that might mean. And also, I appreciate what you've said about the balance of competencies, but if we actually want to negotiate from within the EU for a better situation for the UK, the balance of competencies is a UK exercise at the moment. It's not been conducted in a pan-European way, and I just wonder if you could just give us a bit more detail about why you think it's so important that the UK is conducting this exercise.
It's important that it conducts the exercise because after 40 years, I think it is right and necessary to take a step back and just have a considered analysis of what membership has meant for us. And consultees are being invited to say where they think EU level involvement has been beneficial to British interests, where it has been disadvantageous, where they'd like to see more Europe, where they might like to see less Europe. It's up to people submitting evidence whether they want to argue for the treaties to be changed in some way, or whether they think the problem lies more with the wording of particular directives, or perhaps the propensity of the Commission to micromanage rather than to rest on the alternative approach of mutual recognition of different national standards. And I think there'll be a different balance of evidence reflected depending which subjects we're talking about. But I think it is, in my view, a way of moving, I hope, debate in the UK towards one that is based upon consideration of evidence and hard facts, rather than simply the odd anecdote and the occasional horror story about what happens in the EU. And this is open to other member states to contribute if they want to. Some have, and the evidence and the list of people who've submitted evidence will all be published at this time the reports are published, and others are welcome to do so. We're being very open about this. I think that the EU is a process of continuous renegotiation, dossier by dossier. So I could easily spend a long time now sort of setting out where we are seeking reforms. But just to take the regulation example, this default principle for micro businesses was agreed last year. We're now pressing the Commission to go back through the acquis and to seek to apply that exemption for small businesses to existing, not just to new law. We're also urging the Commission to act upon their recently published scorecard of the 10 top regulatory issues identified by businesses themselves as the most troublesome. Now, they've come up with an interim report that will be on the table for the European Council today and tomorrow. We're wanting to see, by the autumn, a further programme of committed actions. Which measures will the Commission seek to withdraw or to repeal in order to give those greater opportunities to businesses throughout Europe?
If a supplementary question, the Foreign Affairs Committee from Westminster have just published the Future of European Union, a UK Government Policy Committee report. And recommendation 23 on that report is that we recommend the government should conduct and publish an assessment of the impact on business investment in the UK of the Prime Minister's commitment that the Conservative government elected in the 2015 general election would hold an in-out referendum on the UK's continued EU membership by the end of 2017. Are you in a position to tell us if you are going to conduct that debate?
I think it's probably best if I rest upon the position that, of course, we will be replying, as always, with a formal government response to the Select Committee. And I think it would be wrong of me to single out one of the committee's recommendations and sort of describe the answer to that without presenting the government's response as a whole. And rightly, that should go to Mr. Ottaway and his colleagues first.
Okay, and just a final general question is obviously, when we don't have a lot of information at the moment of the EU settlement, and I appreciate that you've said that further detail will come, it's still a huge decision in terms of the change of the UK's relationship with the EU that may in other member states have been ratified through treaty referendum rather than a decision about the negotiations being solely held by the Westminster ministers. I mean, I certainly have some concerns that it's a huge political control that the ministers have over the future of the whole of the UK and Europe. Do you have any comment?
Well, I think the strand of in European reform about democratic accountability is one I personally regard as of enormous importance. And at the moment, one reason we haven't got a sort of detailed position on that spelled out, and partly because I think it's unwise in any case to actually publish your negotiating position in full in any political negotiation, but also because we're at the stage of trying to arouse interest in other countries to get some traction, see what ideas are most likely to command support, and actually have our ideas tested and criticised as well. So when I was in Berlin a few weeks ago at a sort of major sort of conference on the future of Europe, I did flag up ideas such as strengthening the yellow card proposals that the Lisbon Treaty provide, this system under which a given number of national parliaments can trigger a review by the Commission of a policy initiative. And I suggested, well, perhaps Parliament should be given power on more grounds than just subsidiarity to mount such a challenge, or perhaps a certain threshold of Parliaments should be able to impose an outright block on a further Commission initiative. A further refinement would be to make those powers retrospective and give national parliaments the right at a certain trigger point to insist that the Commission reviews or even initiates repeal of an existing piece of EU legislation. So you're looking at the existing rule book, not just at new legislation. And where we are now, I think, is see, right, which of these ideas have some traction elsewhere? There are other ideas out there. A second chamber for the European Parliament composed of national parliamentarians is something that has been discussed, particularly in Eurozone countries. I mean, there's questions about how practical that would be, but we will need to make progress to have support from within other countries too, and we need to have ideas that we have road tested in open debate, and that's how we're taking this forward.
Thank you, Minister.
Okay, can I just pick up on, you touched very briefly there on subsidiarity and some of the challenges and issues that arise through that. Last week we had to convene an extra committee meeting to deal with a EU directive with an explanatory memorandum which quite frankly didn't explain anything, to be honest, and the process for obviously looking at these is 8 weeks. We received at the same day as the Scottish Government 6 weeks and 4 days into the process, which gave us very, very limited time in which to deal with that. And a cynical person may say that given the topic of the directive, which was about the free movement of workers, and the very negative rhetoric that's coming from some aspects of Westminster life on the free movement of workers across Europe, that maybe subsidiarity concerns which were raised with the devolved parliaments were maybe bogus, and that it was a delaying tactic to not actually deal with the directive. And I know that we have written to a number of our colleagues, especially across the Lords and the House of Commons Committee, who have also raised their own concerns. Does the Minister think the timing and the process actually meets the requirements of good practice? And given that we should have been dealing with this within 10 days, 6 weeks and 4 days into an 8-week period created some real difficulties for this Parliament and no doubt our colleagues across Ireland and Wales. And we're hoping you can enlighten us and reduce our cynicism on why maybe that particular directive was treated in such a manner.
I think there's 2 points here. First, I mean, I am always on the lookout for ways in which we can improve further our performance on scrutiny. And, you know, with the best will in the world, there will be times, I'm sure, in any system when something isn't handled as expeditiously as it ought to be. I mean, without knowing all the details of this case, I'd be wrong of me to comment on that. But I know from my own experience, these things, there have been mess-ups from time to time, and then sometimes I've intervened with the department concerned, or sometimes all my officials, whoever it is, and sort of said, look, we need to sharpen up on that. And I promise you that both Lord Boswell and Mr Cash, as the chairs of the respective Westminster committees, are very sharp in reminding UK government departments to do their job effectively. But I do think on the whole, the system works reasonably well. I think that because we have one of the most rigorous systems of scrutiny in the EU, these things do sometimes take time. Sometimes it comes out of the Brussels process quite late. There's a meeting running into the small hours, and it's changed, and then the final text suddenly issues, and we're into that limited period of time within which scrutiny needs to take place. There is, secondly, a particular issue over justice and home affairs measures, because the 3-month time limit that we have for the UK to decide whether to opt in or not is set by treaty. We don't have any flexibility over that, and so things like parliamentary recesses, and of course when in UK and devolved recesses don't overlap completely, there's a further complication there. I mean, that is just a problem that we have to try and manage, but there's no way around the treaty time limits there. So I'm always on the lookout for ways in which to improve things. I mean, one thing I've suggested to the Westminster committees is that the departmental select committees try to look ahead rather more now, and actually perhaps when you look at a commission work programme or green paper or white paper, that more often they might want to have an inquiry before we get to the stage of a draft directive or regulation, when you're into a formal legislative process. There's already been a considerable political investment in the compromise which that text represents. That would be one way of improving things, and we're trying through JNCE to address this. We have a session, a thing on the agenda every meeting called Horizon Scam, and I've talked to your Minister Fiona Hislop about this and the other devolved ministers, and if that works in the way I think we would all like it to do, that would help us to identify better those issues which our respective parliaments are going to find particular political significance, highlight those early on, so everybody's on the lookout, can start to think about them even before you get to that text being tabled.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's all very, very welcome. The issue in particular with this, the EM that came with us, is we sought clarification on what the issue of subsidiarity was, but nobody could tell us. And when the draft came, the Scottish Government were given half a day to deal with the draft at the beginning of the process. There was no subsidiarity concerns raised at that point, but they were raised at a much later point with no clarification on what the subsidiarity concern was, and we had to deliver a report last week from our committee that said we do not have enough information to make this decision, therefore we think there's no subsidiarity concerns here. So as much as you're saying about the process and improving the process is very, very welcome, I think on this particular one there is something that needs to be drilled down here about where subsidiarity concerns are raised and what those actually mean, because no one in any of the departments at Westminster could give us that information to allow us to make a proper judgment on that. And that's the terms in which I have written to Lord Boswell and Bill Cash. Helen, would you want to quickly on this one?
I just support you
Very
absolutely
quickly, yeah.
On that. And if I may just go to a different question, Convener, if that's okay.
Can you? I'm anxious that other members haven't.
Yeah, if I could just make that point about the cynicism about the fact that it was possibly Eastern European countries we were talking about here, and I think that that's something that we know, the debate that's taking place at Westminster. I would hope that you would appreciate that in Scotland we do not have that same attitude. In Scotland we have a much more welcoming attitude. We look forward to the talents and skills of the Eastern Europeans coming to this country, and I would just hope that you would understand that Scotland is a very welcoming country and doesn't have the same. We do not believe there will be a flood of Eastern Europeans coming at the end of 2013.
I think that as I understand, what I'm advised is that there was a discussion within Whitehall as to which department had the policy lead on this one, and that had to be resolved at Whitehall level. That accounted for for some of the delay. And I think I would say, look, this is not, I think, a case where a conspiracy there is justified. I think it was more a question of trying to sort out who was it who had the lead on this. I mean, I will feed back your comments, Convener, about the subsidiarity question, and you're feeling the committee's been unable to get a clear response from this. I mean, all I'd say, without knowing all the detail of the internal discussions that took place between the leader departments, that when it comes to some of these questions to do with the detail of freedom of movement, we take the subsidiarity principle as meaning that national governments should have should have a fair amount of freedom to how they implement the principle of freedom of movement. And in particular, of course, the treaty makes clear that national security systems, social security systems, remain a matter for national competence, not for EU competence. And it's where you then get an interplay between the rights of freedom of movement and eligibility for social security payments. You start to have the overlapping of EU competence on one issue with national competence on the other. And so we do think the principle of subsidiarity is relevant in that context. But I will sort of report back to the two departments concerned about.
That would be very welcome. And on the social security issue, I think maybe that will be tested in a court now, so hopefully we'll get a definitive answer on that. Hans Alan Malik.
Thank you very much, and good morning and welcome to Scotland, Minister, particularly to warm Scotland. And just sticking to the warm agenda, I just want to emphasise that I want to endorse everything that Helen Eadie has said in regards to the UK not actually getting all the funding that we possibly may be able to do so. I think that was a very important element of today's discussion, and I look forward to their response in due course. But one of the things I wanted to bring to your attention is the growing illegal governments in Europe, part of the European Union. And the stark example that I can give you is Greece, where we've had a government change without an election, and we have accepted that as a government, and they continue to be a member of the European Union. Now, I know that, and I deal with a lot of our Commonwealth countries, we've expelled them or suspended them for far lesser deeds than this, yet we allowed Greece to continue, and Italy for a while to continue as well, despite they were not duly elected governments. And I'm just wondering, what are your thoughts on that in terms of what should our position be as a government, because we consider democracy to be a very important element in all of this, and we champion this cause around the world, yet we let ourselves down in the heart of Europe.
I mean, I always cautious before I comment on the sort of detailed political arrangements in other democracies, but I would just gently challenge Mr. Malik on what he said about Greece. Now, Greece has a written constitution, which lays down the procedure to be followed in the event that a government resigns or loses a vote of confidence in Parliament. In the case of Greece, they had two elections in quick succession last year, neither of which produced an outcome which led to an obviously stable coalition arrangement. It's been very difficult for them to come to a coalition. But as I've watched Greek politics in the last year, I mean, what I've seen is those governments in Athens having to go to their parliament, having to get approval for the various budgetary decisions that they have wished to see approved, for the cuts in spending and pensions and so on. The same was true in Italy. It is true that Mr. Berlusconi resigned and was replaced by Mr. Monti without a general election. But my understanding is that that was done within the rules set down in Italy's constitution, and Mr. Monti, when he was Prime Minister, could only govern by getting laws through Parliament and being able to count, if it came to it, on a vote of confidence in Parliament. And I think the political truth was that both the main centre-left and centre-right groupings in the Italian Parliament considered that it was not in their interest to bring down the Monti government precipitately, because the electorate would probably punish them for it. In his early months in particular, Mr. Monti's government had very high approval ratings in all the Italian opinion polls. So I think these countries have different systems from our own, but I think we have to respect their own constitutional arrangements.
Yeah, just as a follow-up on this particular point, and that is that they, as countries, as individual countries, may have different standards of democracy, but they are now part of Europe, and they have a greater responsibility. And I think we, as European colleagues, have also got a responsibility to try and support them in overcoming those difficulties, and not to allow to have a government in position that is not truly representative of their people. I'm not going to press you on an answer on that, because I think it's unfair of me to do that today. But what I will press you on, and that is the issue about visa applications from overseas students coming to the UK, and in particular in Scotland. I also happen to be the chair of a cross-party working group on the Middle East and South Asia. And one of the questions I want to ask you is that since the UK Border Agency was set up with the new immigration rules, we have seen some 25% drop in students coming from India and Pakistan. That's a huge loss to our economy in Scotland. And I want to know what is your opinion on this, and have you got anything in mind to redress this issue for us?
Well, I think it's an important issue. I mean, it is taking me quite a long way outside my ministerial responsibilities to things that are very much Home Office and perhaps a biz lead for Mr. Willits' area of that department. But I think, if you look at the decisions facing the UK government, there have been two contrasting pressures. On the one hand, I'm with Mr. Malik on this, we want to continue to be able to attract the brightest and best in the world. There's no doubt that being able to attract to our universities really high-powered students of all disciplines it's good for the universities because they're able to charge full fees, but it's also good in terms of soft power in the United Kingdom. Those men and women grow up and are influential players in business or politics in their own countries and have good memories of their time in the UK. On the other hand, there is a genuine problem over the levels of immigration, of net migration into the United Kingdom, and how the United Kingdom manages its immigration system in a way that is fair to everybody and which deters abuse. So you want to give opportunities to people who are good students coming to high-quality universities, but we've all come across examples of colleges which on closer inspection have turned out to be pretty unimpressive institutions that seem to have college on the nameplate but not much to back them up once you get inside the door, and actually frankly are exploiting people who come and pay them fees in the hope they're going to be students here. So I think the tightening up on college registration was important. If you look overall at the UK's offer for international students, those with the right qualifications who've got the money to pay the fees and a good level of English can study here. There's no annual impact on their numbers. They're able to work part-time and do work placements during their studies, and they can stay on after graduation provided that they get a job worth $20,300 a year or more, or they set up as a graduate entrepreneur. And overall, the number of such students worldwide coming to our universities is still on the rise.
Yeah, just at the back of that, in terms of bogus colleges, I think you were a bit shy to use the word, but I have no qualms in using the word. I have to say that these were in the main not in Scotland. That's the first thing I want to point out. The second thing I want to point out is this is a very large cut in our student revenue. And the third thing I want to suggest is that most of these students now are going to are friendly nations, like the Americas, Canadas, Australia, New Zealand. They're no different from us. And what I'm really suggesting is perhaps you would consider Scotland as a special case and reintroduce Fresh Talent Initiative in Scotland. And also, in terms of immigration, I have known some of our colleges and universities who have gone out to these countries, who have worked very hard to encourage students to come to the United Kingdom and to Scotland in particular, where immigration officers have said that they haven't been shopping around. Now, to be quite frank, I'm not keen for them to be shopping around. I want them to come here. This should be their first and last destination for education. We have a very rich history of education. We're a nation which is drug-free, weapon-free. We are very bilingual as a country. We have all the various religions and cultures. We have over 150 communities in Scotland. So we are an ideal destination for a student community, yet we are being hampered by the UK visa immigration, and we need your support to try and change that. And I am saying to you, is I would very much welcome a statement from you which would encourage that student population to turn to Scotland as a destination.
Well, I'm keen for the best students from all around the world to come to the United Kingdom, whether to Scotland, England, Wales or Northern Ireland. Now, I'm not going to single out any one part of the UK. I don't blame any member of the Scottish Parliament for wanting to put Scotland first. That's your job. Completely understand that. But I would just say this. Mr. Malik sort of talked about US and Canada. I mean, they're having similar debates to us about this tension between migration and needing to attract students from around the world. And when you put yourselves in the shoes of a student, sure, the complexity or simplicity of a country's immigration system may be one element in a student's consideration, but actually I question whether that really is top of the list of a would-be international student. You know, I mean, what they're looking at, and this is not a criticism of Scottish university or anything, but you know, they will be looking at what the course is like, whether the teachers under whom they hope to study have the global reputation for a scientist, what's the quality of the laboratories and research facilities that are available, what's the country like to live in. There'll be a whole number of different factors, and yeah, we've got in Scotland, the UK as a whole, to continue to make the case for us having a really good higher education sector that can offer fantastic courses under inspiring teachers for the highest caliber students.
Mr. Just a last comment on that, and that is, you've touched on courses. Universities and colleges can only offer courses if they have the finance to do so. If we have up to 25% cuts in student intakes, that's going to affect their ability to deliver the courses that students require, not only for overseas students, but our indigenous students as well. So we are hurting our own indigenous student population at the same time as the business case that has been made for students from overseas. So therefore, whilst I appreciate the fact that your responsibility is across the board, nevertheless, that is still a responsibility that you have to execute, and I'm suggesting to support you in the execution of your duties, that you need to help us get the students into the country.
Of course, you've had Mr. Willits, I believe, in front of this committee earlier this year, or perhaps last year. So, I mean, he's certainly given evidence to the Scottish Parliament and one of the committees, and I think he's the minister who is best placed to answer in detail on that. I'd simply observe that, of course, if we look at the other countries, and Mr. Malik referred to universities in the United States, I mean, they don't look predominantly to state funding to provide their courses. I'm not saying we should copy their system exactly, but it's not, I think, proven that it's simply the attractiveness of a university course depends upon the level of state funding in any particular year.
Thanks for that. Just picking up very, very quickly a wee anecdote, and it's mainly for information rather than comment, I think, but I think it demonstrates very, very clearly the lack of understanding of the immigration needs in Scotland. One of your cabinet colleagues, in a very recent visit to a local authority in Scotland, who shall remain nameless to spare the person the blushes, asked the officials, what kind of challenges do you have with immigration? Coming from a very negative point of view, when the official came back and said, we don't have enough people coming. So our challenges are different from the challenges of what the attitude was. So sort of with respect, I think Mr. Malik's plea for special interest to be placed on Scotland because we don't have enough people coming to Scotland to work is certainly something that should be taken into consideration.
Of course, the next round of the Balance of Competences review, which is now open for evidence, includes freedom of movement and I think and education. So I think there's an open invitation to this committee or the Scottish Parliament as a whole to submit evidence to that.
Already way ahead of you on that one, thank you. Willie Coffey.
Thanks very much, Convener, and good morning to you, Minister. I wonder if I could pick you up on some of your earlier remarks in response to a discussion on the independence referendum. I think you mentioned that various papers by your government have been prepared on the basis of legal advice and so on. Could you clarify if that legal advice is advice just offered freely by legal advisors, or whether that is legal advice underpinned by your law officers? And if that's the case, are you willing and able to publish that advice?
I think good try by Mr Coffey, but it's been the practice of successive British governments that we never comment on whether or not we've had advice from the law officers and we don't publish it.
That's very helpful. That chimes with what the Scottish Government have been saying for quite some time, so we are at one on that matter. Could I pick you up on the comment that you made from Prime Minister Cameron about the reasons for the attempt to renegotiate the treaty, and you offered three main reasons. One was on competitiveness, the second one was on flexibility, and the third reason was in democratic legitimacy. Are you telling us that the United Kingdom Government's position is that unless progress is made on all three of these, and I would like to hear your views on what that progress may be, that the United Kingdom would then recommend leaving the European Union and taking Scotland with it, largely, in my view, against the wishes of the Scottish people?
I need to, sorry if I wasn't clear enough in my earlier comments. First, the government, the coalition, believes that the European Union needs profound reform, which should focus on those three areas of competitiveness, flexibility and democratic accountability. David Cameron, as Conservative Party leader, believes that elements of those reforms should be entrenched in the form of treaty change, and that he will include such a commitment in his manifesto in 2015. But it's never been his view, and it's not the government's view, that we have to wait to 2015 to start on the process of EU reform, or that there's not a lot that could be achieved without treaty change, ahead of treaty change. There's a huge amount you could achieve without treaty change. So if we look at these elements, as I did say, I think earlier to the committee, most of what we'd want to achieve on competitiveness front, trade, extending the single market further, particularly in services, smarter, less expensive regulation, could be done without treaty change, although I could see the advantage of treaty changes that when we get to those, which in some way limit the ability of the Commission to be so detailed in some of its legislative proposals. And again, I talked to some colleagues in other European countries, and they will share my exasperation at some of what comes out of Brussels and say it doesn't have to be this detailed. Subsidiarity and proportionality are not being properly observed. Now, can that be addressed without treaty change? Would treaty change actually cement it more closely? I mean, that's the sort of discussion that we're starting to have. On democratic accountability, it would be possible, and the Dutch have suggested a couple of ways in which this might be done. It'd be possible for the Commission and the other institutions to agree on working practices which in effect allowed national parliaments to impose a stronger brake upon EU initiatives without changing the rules in the treaty. But you would be relying on goodwill. It couldn't be enforced ultimately in the European Court of Justice if it were just a working practice. You'd need a treaty change to entrench that. And certainly if you were to set up a new institution, for example, the second chamber of the European Parliament, that clearly is something you would have to have a separate treaty for. If, on flexibility, at the moment we're going dossier by dossier. We've got a good compromise on the single supervisory mechanism. We had agreement 2 weeks ago, the negotiations on the Markets in Financial Instruments Directive, that the principle of non-discrimination on grounds of currency should govern how the European Banking Authority operates. Again, that's welcome. But in part, this takes you back to the argument of December 2011, that if our colleagues in the Eurozone want to write into the treaties, in effect, a requirement for the EU's aims and objectives to include stability and cohesion of the Eurozone, then we would want to make sure that was balanced by something that protected the integrity of the single market and didn't see that distorted by the need to accommodate this new Eurozone priority. And that's where we had the argument and the ultimately the failure to agree at the December 2011 European Council. So, in part, the extent to which one would need treaty changes will depend upon the extent to which we can confidently deliver results through other means. And at this stage, it's too early to be certain as to exactly how far one would want to take the treaty change agenda. That's something that the Prime Minister, in his party capacity, will want to be considering very actively over the next year and a half.
Thank you for that. Two of your Cabinet colleagues at the moment have said that if there was a referendum today, they would vote to leave the European Union. In the absence of the progress that you've described in those three key themes, what would your position be?
You have to be an optimist at this job. I mean, I think my judgment is this: our national interest is best served by membership of the European Union, but unless the European Union undertakes some pretty far-reaching reforms, it is going to be of declining economic importance in the world. It will be less able to deliver high living standards and public services to its citizens. It will become a less cohesive, more quarrelsome and less reputable multinational organisation. So we need reform. And I believe that, from my conversations with counterparts, there is a growing recognition of that around Europe. And I repeat again, an MFF cut, common fisheries policy reform, exemption from regulations for micro businesses. We are seeing evidence of progress. It's not enough, but that should give us some encouragement that we can win these battles.
One final, very brief question, I hope. Minister, you'll be aware, no doubt, that the two great nations of Scotland and England will be meeting in August to play a football match. And the first of these was carried out in 1872 here in Glasgow. You may also be aware, having heard the beautiful piping music from Holyrood Palace this morning, that the English FA proposes to ban the bagpipes from entering Wembley Stadium. Could we ask you to act on our behalf and use whatever influence you have to make sure that the English FA do not carry out that ban, and that members of the Tartan Army will be welcome to bring their bagpipes to Wembley to celebrate the occasion?
I have to, this is a completely new one on me. I have to say to Mr. Coffey, I think my influence over the English FA is limited in the extreme. I'm frankly astonished by what Mr. Coffey is telling me. I don't know, and I have no idea what the rationale is. I'll have a word with the sports minister in London about this. But my understanding is that Her Majesty the Queen likes to be woken by bagpipes, every morning, and whether in Holyrood or in Buckingham Palace. And I'd have thought what's good enough for the Queen ought to be good enough for the FA.
Excellent. Thank you.
I think, just in a quick final remark on that, I think the FA may have shifted a wee tiny bit on this, in as much as they may not ban them, but they may charge for the use of them, which is even more ludicrous. So any intervention, I think, would be great. We have literally no time left at all. Very, very quickly, last few seconds, because we really need to be closing committee now.
I realise, Minister, you may not be able to answer this, but if you could take it back and speak to your colleagues about it. It's an issue. Our committee did an inquiry on the China plan, and we did a visitation to a company called Todd & Duncan, and they're a textile manufacturer, and they were concerned about the tariffs imposed on Scottish products in China. And it has an ongoing concern that this is a real impediment to Scottish businesses' competitiveness in the Chinese market. So the existence of this 16% tax rebate made available to all the Chinese exports also makes it difficult for Scottish competitors. Now, I realise there's two issues there. There's the policy of the Chinese government itself, but there's also the policy of your business department colleagues. So I just wonder, because it's a trade barrier and it also obviously affects our salmon industry as well, if that could be looked at.
Yep, I mean, we'll happily take that up with the Trade Minister. I mean, we're very keen to see the reduction, removal of trade barriers, and we're certain, I would argue that our missions in China are doing their very best to promote Scottish business. They'll be doing so again when the First Minister visits Beijing soon. They certainly push Scotch whisky exports very, very hard, and trade, UK exports to China overall are performing strongly. I mean, they rose by just under 13% during 2012. So I think we've got a lot further to go. All these emerging markets present not just challenges, but huge opportunities, hundreds of millions of potential new customers for our goods and services. So we need to keep trying to reduce the free trade barriers, and it's not just in Britain's or Europe's gift. This is a matter of Chinese government policy as well. And at the same time, we need to never be satisfied with our standard performance on export and investment. We've got to keep trying to raise our game, encourage our businesses to raise their sights, their level of ambition as well. That's what the Germans have done very successfully with the emerging economies. If we could match the success of German business in exporting to the emerging economies, we'd make a huge difference to jobs and growth in this country.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Convener.
Okay, can I thank you very much, because we're now running over time now. Thank you very much, Minister, for coming back to committee, and we look forward to maintaining that engagement. And I'm sure there's many items that we could have went into great depth with you today, but I'm sure we will write to you on that. And we wish you a safe trip back home, and hopefully at Wembley in August you will hear the sound of bagpipes. Can I offer all of my colleagues best wishes for a restful recess? And can we put on record from our committee our thanks to our clerks and Ian McKeever for Spice and Sally from our press team, who have done an amazing job over the past few months and the amount of work that they've done. And just put that on record, a thanks for them, and a very restful recess too. Claire.
Just a final comment on that. I think we should also put on record how the coverage of both plans that have been covered by the committee has been received in the media, and the clerk's work in that should be recognised too.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Minister. Close the meeting now.